Welcome to the Fine Print, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Caleb Teskey, and today I am joined again by Larissa Bolivar here. We got a chief of operations for Higher Power Flower and Moss Greenery in Oklahoma, and executive director of Cannabis Consumers Coalition. Larissa, thanks for joining me again here.
Hi there. It's great to
Yeah,
be back.
yeah. How was your holiday?
It was great. We worked a lot, but that's just part of the gig right now.
Well, I also you mentioned something about your work with iComply too, and I was hoping that before we get into anything serious, maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
So yes, I've been working with iComply right now. I'm doing training development and helping with um, building all of their compliance training programs across the US and legal states for compliance training within the organization, whether it's responsible vendor or training managers, setting up standard operating procedures. We write those too. I write those too. I feel like that's why I do chief operations for a flower brand that's managing Moss Greenery. It's just I just live and breathe compliance, I guess. And that's what iComply is. They're a compliance company. Mark founded iComply, I believe, in 2011, and he was one of the first, if not the first, compliance companies to enter the market. He is Brazilian and white. His dad is his last name. That's why he has Anglo last name, Slav. But his mom, who just recently passed away from COVID, um, was an immigrant from Brazil, yes. And he comes from an amazing, loving family, very close-knit Latin type family, with his mom, with that kind of love. And then sadly, his sister and brother were shot at the Q Club shootings and they survived, but his sister almost became number six. Yeah, so that's been really tough. I joined the iComply family in 2014 when I started getting my policy degree, and I was experiencing a lot of discrimination in Colorado when I first moved back. I come from a working class just like Mark. My dad's the immigrant though, and my mom is the white person, but she's working class also. Our family were like coal miners and stuff. We're not very wealthy family, and I think she's like second or third generation immigrant herself, but from Eastern Europe. So, and we have our own issues there. So, I come from a family background of struggle. But anyhow, I really, Mark and I kind of bonded over that. And he's my little brother's age. So I just really, I don't know, I just feel kind of like I needed, it was a really good fit from the beginning working. And I actually left to start the Cannabis Consumers Coalition after I was invited to with being lured with $30,000 by a lobbyist named Samantha Walsh and another one named Jason Wharf and a lawyer named Robert Corey Jr. in Colorado. I think I mentioned them before. They were having meetings about the need for a consumer coalition. And they had approached someone named Chloe Villano who didn't want to do this because nobody wanted to call out the industry, especially people who are doing consulting in the space, because they didn't want to, look like they were casting shade on their friends or people like the early licensees. Well, and I had already spoken with Matt Fox, who's one of the co-founders of the Colorado Compassion Club and a former board member. He like a week before, he and I were talking about the need of like a real consumer advocacy, like a watchdog organization that just kind of a blunt, not just reviewing products, but ethics and everything else in the space. Because we saw from the beginning that there was a lack of diversity and a lack of fairness and equity in the space, and that it wasn't just color based, but it was also class based. And when I was getting my master's, that's what I was focusing my research on. And this was in 2013, 2014. I graduated 2015. And my mistake was letting people know that this was what I was researching, which, instead of getting help and by organizations that I approached, I was treated like, and people personally, I was treated like a competitor, which I was shocked. I don't know why I expected more of a kumbaya type of thing, but anyhow, I don't want to go too much into that, but it all kind of applies to my relationship working with what I call the I Comply family, and why that really means a lot to me, because I watched Mark also get discriminated against. And I felt like he was being used by the same people and tokenized by the same people, because he led the Amendment 64 campaign, the Southern Colorado jurisdiction, and worked hand in hand with Brian Vicente and Christian Sederberg and Mason Tavert and all those folks who led cannabis adult use legalization throughout the state. And instead of choosing him to work with on the compliance side, they chose another, I believe it was a lady that they went with instead. So I guess they're still meeting the diversity, quota or whatever. But the fact of the matter is that they didn't go with someone who had a long-term relationship, and they went with someone else who came from a background of wealth. And so that's when I started noticing the extreme classism that had started infiltrating the movement in Colorado. And so my interest in social equity, even though my dad is a proven immigrant and he's brown, like he's dark skinned, like he's, almost full-blooded indigenous. And so, like literally he looks like the kind of person they're trying to arrest at the border and put in cages. And so, this is something, and just, I don't know, like I saw that he was experiencing the same kind of classism, and it was just really distressing, but it took him a long time to see it. And he wrote about the colonization of social equity recently, and called it out. And that took a lot of courage on his behalf, because he was calling out the people who he actually at one point worked with, but it finally hit him. We applied for a grant in Colorado to do the social equity training and development program. And all of us are extremely qualified. And one of the requirements were to have collaborating partners, which we did. One of them being a firm that had over 60 years of workforce development in Chicanos por la Causa. And but I don't believe that they were local, but they were working in Colorado or planning to. But we were collaborating with other local people, but it wasn't the right collaborators. We were collaborating, what they wanted, and who got the contract was someone who also had collaborators, but it was Vicente Sederberg, Terrapin Care Station, like Live Well, Native Roots, all of the big businesses who, have been consolidating power since the very beginning. These are the people who bankrolled the regulations that first started. You had people who were really powerful in the beginning when they created House Bill 1284, which is really important for adult use, and to understand the tax and regulate model is to understand House Bill 1284. And you had basically, a think tank, if you will, of people in Colorado, all elites, who put their heads together to create maybe we should just, I don't know. I don't want to get too much into, because you asked me about I Comply. So that's a whole other,
go ahead.
Yeah, I'm like, should I segue into what we were planning to talk about? Or,
go for it.
But yeah, I do want to plug I Comply, if, whether it's supporting his family or, if people need compliance, that is probably one of the most secure routes to go, in terms of quality and their operations, scaled in the most compliant way possible.
Yeah, and please continue with your story, because I loved where you were going with
that. So in the beginning, we had so with the House Bill 1284, which is what created the Marijuana Enforcement Division in Colorado, that was, a very exclusive group of people. It wasn't the originating medical marijuana activists, which was one of, I was included. There was the 90s group, and then the early 2000s, group. And then after Ken's murder, we talked about this before, it was an opportune time to take over the narrative and to control the narrative, because he was getting all the media before. And so it was possible for them to, take that narrative over, and then use my organization and what happened to Ken as actual scapegoats as to why we needed regulations, and demonize us as thugs, which, I didn't appreciate. I literally went broke helping patients. I mean, that's on record. There's articles showing that we went the extra mile for our patients, but they try to paint us like demons, illicit market, black market thugs and what have you. We're working class or poor. Thanks a lot. That's just pure racism and classism. And so anyhow, and that's what that Playboy article was. So these people were like, therefore, we need to, change the look of what the cannabis business owner is like. And then they have to meet these monetary requirements because that's how you keep out the bad people. And then they went on this huge media campaign as well against cartels. Like if you Google, the threat of cartel and Colorado, like Southern Colorado,
Sure.
Southern Colorado marijuana and cartel,
Or
you'll see all the
California.
or California, all the dog whistle racism. There's other criminal organizations in these areas. So anyhow, so back to 1284. So 1284 is really critical in understanding the evolution of the tax and regulate legalization model. Prior to 1284, I think I mentioned this before, I was running the dispensary and cultivation more like a nonprofit. And preferably, that's how I would have liked to register as a business, because I didn't feel like I should be making money off of sick people. And
the tax laws seem like it makes that kind of impossible.
So they had to do something else, which is on face value, the tax and regulate model looks good because it does help create a pathway for ownership. But what happened in the beginning is that because it was such a rich boys and girls club, then it literally excluded everyone else. And that's when you get your first layer of protectionism. And so what the tax and regulate model did is it kind of piggybacked off of medical marijuana, off the 1284 regulations. The 1284 regulations set operational guidelines and compliance guidelines. And the thing is, and I've been accused of not wanting any regulations and wanting a free market so businesses like Curaleaf can flourish, which is bullshit. No. What I'm talking about is peeling the onion all the way back to where this began and where the inequity started. And, and all these people that are jumping in and making it about a diversity and inclusion issue are completely missing the boat when it comes to this also being a class issue that was completely developed and it was completely protectionist from the beginning and remains so because they're protecting the tax and regulate model that basically fuels their entire existence, if you will. Like, for example, the social equity model that they keep, they're proposing in Massachusetts and in other states, where they're probably going to propose federally, which I actually wrote about when I did my social equity research way back in 2015, 2014, and what have you. I started advocating for using the marijuana tax dollars for social equity, but I didn't realize how bad the regulatory capture was. And, again, it starts with the 1284 and these regulations that were baked in Colorado, devised and cooked. The recipe was started there by these elite people. They absolutely helped lawmakers decide who was desirable and undesirable. We touched on that before. And then that's when they created these barriers. And then they started, doing other things, forced vertical integrations. They started adding more and more regulations. They utilized, so around this time, they're building a relationship with a guy, Representative Jonathan Singer, who would be one of the sponsors of Amendment 64. And so in Colorado and in other states, they, start backing candidates who are, and very, very importantly, in Jonathan Singer's case, he came from Boulder and he went to CU Boulder. So a lot of these people are, like Mason Tavert, Jessica Peck Corey, they're all, Wanda James, they're all CU Boulder people, which basically took over cannabis in Colorado and took over the poor people in Colorado. That's literally the history.
Who is Wanda James? That name sounds familiar.
She owns Simply Pure and she's a social equity advocate. She actually helped build SAFER and basically the adult use. She helped create the marijuana enforcement division, but she was a fundraiser. I think we talked about her before. I'm not sure if we talked about her before, but she is one of the first Black dispensary owners in the country. I think she says she's the first, but I've had people tell me that there's someone in California who doesn't want a lot of media. This is true. When I did my research for social equity, a lot of Black and brown people are scared of even coming out of the closet, if you will, because of sustained persecution for generations. You know, my family
I don't
thinks I'm
blame them.
crazy for
Yeah,
doing what I do.
I don't blame them.
Yeah, like I have some, Black women saying that I hate Black women, which I mean, like my godmother was Black. My mom was raised by her Black family. My grandmother remarried a Black man when my mom was like 4 or 5 years old. I don't remember. But my mom has severe PTSD because this was because of the civil rights movement. And like all of my family are Black. It's not even that, that's a whole other conversation right now about social equity being led by, just Black people or just brown people or colorism. It's irrelevant. The drug war was created to target all of our communities, and it's just ridiculous. Everybody fighting over scraps right now because of this is what happened in the beginning. I'm telling you how the pie was created and why we only have scraps. And, Wanda James was actually at that table helping herself to the original pie. So, I mean, and this isn't even calling her out. This is just stating a matter of fact. And, she was there. She was raising money for MPP causes. Well, they were all working together at that point because eventually they would write, Mason Tvert and Paul Amorantino would write their book about, alcohol being, the safer alternative, or marijuana being a safer alternative to alcohol. So it's just, it began as, this is, well, we have medical marijuana and there's loose, regulations and loose interpretations around that. So let's just, put some guidelines around it, and we'll use all of our connections to the federal government, get some guidelines. Wanda also was one of President Obama's biggest bundlers. So it was real strategic for MPP backed people like Vicente Sederberg to start working with her politically, because she has political aspirations. Obviously, she just ran for office and won as regent, which, I mean,
she was a bundler for Obama.
She was a bundler for Obama. Yeah. So, she wasn't someone that was persecuted in the drug war. Her mom is white from England. Her mom's British. Her dad was in the military. And it's her brother's story. She has a half brother that she met when she was 19, or he was 19, or 19 years, or I don't know, something like that. And his story is really like shitty. Like he got arrested for marijuana and was put on a chain gang. And so like it's kind of a shame that, yeah, oh, I know, like in Texas or something, like what the hell, they still do that. I was floored when I heard about that. So I mean, it's a relevant story, but her dad wasn't stabbed selling drugs when she was 4 years old, and here she's displacing actual people who have actual horror stories in their childhood on
well,
up.
I also don't want to discount her story because that sounds shitty right there. And I don't want to discount that.
Yeah. So, but the point being is they have everybody fighting everybody else, and it's a lot of it is for scraps, and it's ultimately created by these lobbying groups that created these regulations that just shut everybody out except those that could pay to play. And so now what you're seeing is just complete and total market protectionism.
Okay, so
what they're protecting is their license values that were created in the tax and regulate model, which also created limited licensing and created a false sense of scarcity.
So can I got to interject right now.
Yes.
Last time we spoke, you told me about some things that I have tried to confirm since we spoke. Okay. One of these things was that Vicente Sederberg was buying up equity ownership in some of these companies that they were help starting through their consulting firm, Vicente Strategies. It does appear that you were right about that. I found through a conversation I had with someone else, I have found a lawsuit in Maryland. It doesn't even involve Vicente Sederberg. It involved a company they helped start. And because of a lawsuit that they filed against another company, now the equity ownership stake from Vicente Sederberg has come to light in that lawsuit. So this 10% rule, which you suggested was being used to buy up ownership stake in some of these companies, it does appear that at least in one case, that's exactly what's happening. And
Yes.
I
And
would not.
Vicente,
Yeah, go ahead.
well, in Vicente Sederberg, they have like a holdings company, VS Holdings or something like that, where they do have equity in a lot of the licenses that they apply for, which was really common. A lot of people they'll help, I help write license applications. I've been consulting in space since 2008. It's just people need help with licensing in any case. But the way the marijuana business works is the licensing process is more like competing for an RFP, and you're submitting like this much of documents. And so they kind of had the edge on that because they wrote Amendment 64. They were getting a lot of the business on that. And so a lot of the big businesses that you see that came to be in the beginning, they own. And there could be other owners of these businesses that we don't know. It could be politicians for all we know. We don't,
Right. Because of
they don't
that
have to
rule,
disclose it.
nobody knows really who you could own up to 9.999% of a company, and no one would know it.
I
And
mean, I'm sure there's ways to find.
regardless of where that rule came from, because of that rule, that is the reality of the situation here, if I'm reading it correctly.
Yeah, you would have to. I think that one way to figure out would be getting operating agreements from companies, which I think it's important at this juncture, because like when I look at social equity and I look at how the tax and regulate model, which isn't I mean, yes, we have to tax things, yes, we have to regulate, but let's look at the beneficiaries of this system. And you have people that, now they're realizing that, oh crap, we tried to be the winner take all and take the whole industry, and then we got called out by people who, cut left out. So now we have to make ourselves look better. So, but how this works though is because the licensing process is so extensive, the hoops are so high. And a lot of cases, you have to hire a lobbyist or an attorney to even help you through the process. So here you have all of these lobbyists and attorneys are creating all of these rules where they're the beneficiaries. And it's like this closed loop system of these folks just constantly benefiting off of this tax and regulate model. They're also teaching the training courses. They're also getting all of the grants given by the city. It's just, there's your inequity right there. And then they're in your face saying, oh, we don't have equity. Well, the whole tax and regulate model is a protectionist model. And now, it's a bunch of people trying to protect different businesses and the different values, but we don't even know what the true values are anymore. Production costs are all over the place depending on the state and depending on the level of experience an operator has. A lot of times people come into this game and they don't have any cannabis experience, and they're hiring growers, and they're not really listening to the growers. They're, I've seen this time and time again. They're literally just going online and getting every little bit of advice, and they'll come in and change everything a grower set up overnight. And then it takes them like 5 years and $10 million to try to launch a business. Like, what the hell are you stupid? Like, I mean, like, anyhow, so these people are also.
I've never seen people waste so much money fucking trying to grow weed. It's fucking ridiculous.
It's stupid. It's so stupid. And, they because they haven't spent the years developing the operational efficiencies like dealers.
And they don't know how to grow weed.
They don't know how to grow weed.
Which seems like a common thread here. Like, honestly, if one of these MSOs could start cranking out some top-notch product, it would be a real problem, I think. Because they could produce it for so cheap. Dude, I just really think they haven't invested in growers. And it shows. Like, the product, it shows.
No, because they displaced the growers. They put the growers into a $15 an hour position. These are people who, kept the genetics going. These are people who created the operational efficiencies. I've grown. I help manage one. There's a lot of work that goes into it, and there's a lot of years of failures in particular. There's a lot of trial and error in cannabis, and they don't realize this. But What they wanted though, because the tax and regulate model, Vicente Sederberg, through, I mean, again, like I mentioned, this was a rich boys and girls club in the beginning with the tax and regulate model that was promoting it. And a lot of it was, you know, yeah, it just favored people coming in from Wall Street and MBAs and these folks' friends who were helping fund the legalization movement and then, and it's not even a conspiracy to say this because then they replicated this model everywhere. And that's how we got Curaleaf, who essentially helped Curaleaf and Cresco. And I wrote a blog about this, but a report about this, but, advising not to vote for adult use in Arizona because it was so corrupt. And I actually helped write an application in Arizona for medical, and I already saw how corrupt it was in that model. So when I saw how easy it was for, I think it was like 5 or 7, I don't remember, businesses, big MSOs that got together and essentially just bought like Trulieve, Cresco, Curaleaf. I'm sure there's others, Columbia Care. I don't know. I don't want to misquote it, but you can, folks can look it up. But yeah, they literally just paid for these rules, just like you see Kim Rivers trying to do again in Florida. The tax and regulate model, on the one hand, yeah, it's great. It's like it pays for itself, but it's easily exploited.
They're
And
actually
easily
lobbying
corrupted.
Trulieve is actually lobbying to change the Florida Constitution.
What? I haven't even.
I'll send you the story after.
Okay. Yeah. Wait, we've been working a lot. Over the holidays, we're short staffed. And in a way, I kind of like that because then I get to actually work in the grow itself.
Yo,
So,
did
yeah.
you tell me
I've
that
been doing so much compliance. Like, you know what I mean? Like actually working with the plants themselves, and not just compliance.
Did you tell me that Christian Sederberg just left?
Yes. Yeah, actually, yes. So Christian Sederberg, I'm going to pull up that email, but Christian Sederberg left Vicente Sederberg LLP, and
He
they
left the
sent
law
out,
firm.
yeah, a law firm, and he's going to be consulting. And so while this is like, sounds kind of benign, I don't know, like, I don't think that it is. Hang on, let me see. When did I get that email? That was just the other day. Hang on a second. I can either just pull it up. So he's leaving to go do like psychedelic consulting. And it doesn't say legal work, but if he's doing consulting and policy work, it doesn't say consulting, it says policy, which they were already doing. So now I'm wondering if he's just not going to practice law at all. And he's just going to be consulting, which means that he doesn't have to worry about any restrictions.
Has he ever ate mushrooms in his life?
I don't know.
I got to get this guy on the show, dude. Can I get Christian on the show?
You should. I'd be curious to hear what he has to say about everything we talk about. A lot of people were harmed.
I quite frankly don't think they did a great job as consultants. I listened to the meetings, and I just don't think they did a very good job. And quite frankly, if they're going to be consulting on psychedelic issues, I would like to know what their knowledge base is. You know what I mean?
I mean, they're not even like, they're not growers. Like they're not. I can say that I think I've consumed with Brian and Mason and them like years ago. So it's not like they haven't consumed, but they're not like, like the bolder crowd, the wealthier crowd, they still consume, but they're not, it's not the same.
I don't care if you consume or not. I want to know what's in your brain about it. I want to know what you're thinking about it,
Yeah.
Especially if you're going to be consulting on this level where you're talking to multiple states around the country and informing state governments.
Yeah. But, they help create all of the original stakeholder groups in Colorado. So like Andrew Friedman, for example, with Governor Hickenlooper's office, when they first started developing the regulations from 1284 into adult use, medical or adult use recreational marijuana. These are people that actually they work with, that they help put into these positions. who are actually now consultants themselves.
Andrew
And it's
Friedman, is
mostly,
he from CPAIR?
yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Like I,
Just making
if I
sure.
had time, I would map this all out on a whiteboard, but I really, I just
Yeah,
really
get
don't
me
have
a spaghetti
time.
map sometime.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I kind of have one developed for my
Yeah.
book, but it's, there's a lot to it, because then they branched off and they formed the United States Cannabis Council. And then you have, all these different, they're all it is just like all these different replications of the Marijuana Policy Project. And it's just all the same wealthy white people influencing policy. And then there's normal, of course, and the Keith Stroop, who's like, the founder, and they're like the counterculture, but they're not like counterculture. They're still rich attorneys. Like all this is just been like just another way for the wealthy 1% in the United States to transfer wealth. And that's what the tax and regulate model essentially is. You're taxing people at exorbitant rates in certain cases, especially in Colorado. And then you're
20%,
creating,
twice the times in Vermont is double alcohol, basically, which I thought
yeah,
was ridiculous.
it is. It's overkill. And that's, but see, the thing is that they were playing on the, like Mason Subvert, and this is why he was their director of communications for so long. He was really good at communications and creating that story of and manipulating the fear that people had of getting arrested. And he would say, oh, well, people would prefer to go to a safe place, a regulated place to buy product, which is what you hear MSOs say all the time. It's their talking points. That's where it comes from. And it's not even necessarily true. People have spoken with their dollars and they're going back to the illicit market because they want quality. And yeah, illicit market isn't tested, but they even created regulations to keep consumers from accessing testing, arguing that illicit market dealers will use it. Well, then create a testing kit that consumers can use at home then, just like you do for other drugs. Don't sit and make it so that they can't even access it. It's already a very expensive process as it is. It's like, anyhow, that's just another layer,
Sure.
of cost and expense. The but the people who pay for it are the voters and the consumers. And some people, like, they're just so, it's like fatigue. It's like a cross of like Stockholm syndrome and fatigue of just constant persecution. So they're gonna vote for whatever just to get whatever, but they're not going to jail. And so they exploited that emotion. And so here we are, you know, voting for it. And the organization in Colorado that actually opposed Amendment 64, the Denver 420 rally, the original one, and I mentioned this before, they were the original social justice activists. I was part of that, so I should say we. The majority of the organization, not everybody, when it came to Amendment 64, were, against it, but we were a democratic organization. And so, and the majority were against it because it was inequitable, because House Bill 1284, the precursor to tax and regulate, shut out most of the original medical marijuana people who had started their small businesses. They just couldn't scale to keep up with the regulatory model that they were coming up with. They couldn't come up with the, eventually millions of dollars that it would take to compete. And they
Yeah,
did that on purpose.
yeah, and here's my thing. People are still going to go to jail. Here's the thing. The DUI laws, I think, are going to set people up to get in trouble.
Yeah.
They're going to do the same DUI tests that they do with alcohol, which I think is really setting a lot of people up for failure, especially medical patients, dude. If a cop doesn't
Wow.
like the look of your eyeballs, he could get you out of the car. And they're training new drug recognition experts. And I think really what I wanted from legalization was for cops to just leave me alone.
Yeah.
That's
But they don't, that this is a money making racket, like it always has been. And so, and that's another reason why tax and regulate was appealing, was because law enforcement were afraid of losing money with legalization. So, for example, in Colorado, the solution for that was to have former vice cops and other police officers go work for the Department of Revenue and trade in their Department of Justice badges for Department of Revenue badges. But taxpayers were still paying for this, and and licensing fees pay for this. So this is what I mean by that closed loop system, regulatory capture system, because you've got the licensing that's dependent on the state, that's dependent on everything, you know, and it's just the self-feeding beast. But the licensing, that's fees that feed it. And so in Colorado, they created an entire enforcement division over it. And then you know, and the whole state hasn't even gotten on board with that. And so Colorado is just such a restricted market, and it consolidated quickly, and only a handful of people benefited from that. And so but you know, I mean, you can just see how that you have to pay for licensing, and then
Oh
you have
man,
to pay taxes
the
on it.
consolidation
So
you
it's
could
just,
see the consolidation you could already see it happening. Even the guys with the money are struggling. They're like,
yeah,
yo, they.
yeah,
I think a lot of these MSOs really because this is speculation. Because I think they don't know the fucking product and they don't know people that know how to grow it. I think they put the cart way before the horse here, and
yes, absolutely.
they're just trying to buy up their real estate sort of to get ready for this.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, yes. So, you know, it's just very, you know, just very frustrating. You know, that it's just, there's just been a lot of losses in cost wise, you know, because it's made the market very uncompetitive. And those that created the market, those that kept it alive through the almost 100 years of prohibition, literally got left out. And so, and then, you know, now with tax and regulate, they're wanting to use marijuana tax dollars to pay for this system. Well, get this, back to this closed loop thing that I'm talking about. They're going to have to hire lobbyists. So they're going to hire the same people that wrote those rules. So they're making all the money. You see that transfer of wealth? It's like right there in your face. And so they're just shutting people out. They're
It is
consolidating the
wild that.
market,
Sorry, go ahead.
and they're telling us, and then they're gaslighting us, and, you know, calling us bullies or whatever. And, you know, but yet the people that created this model, this transfer of wealth, are leading the conversation now on equity. And it's just incredible. You know,
It is wild
Vicente
too that.
Sederberg got rid of Christian Sederberg, and they put in a new CEO. And this guy has his certificate in equity from like Cornell or something. I was looking at his LinkedIn, and it's like so obvious. It's like, oh, you missed everyone, and so now you're just gonna put on these, you know, all these you know, get these accolades, and then put on all these, you know, certificates and stamps to say, oh, I believe in DEI policy now. But, you know, it's a little late in the game for that,
It
you
seems
know.
wild to me that these companies are allowed to, most of them are Canadian, a lot of the big MSOs, and they're
Oh yeah,
allowed to, they're publicly traded, and
yeah.
people in the States, are still having trouble getting money in a bank. They still can't get a loan.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, these companies are being publicly traded on Canadian exchanges.
You
Uh,
should try to get Jody Emery on here, and she can tell you all about the Canadian side of corruption. She's with Cannabis Culture, and she's an OG activist. Do you
yeah,
remember that magazine? Yeah. And I actually was sat on a panel with her, and I think it was an equity panel for Benzinga. And I believe she's French Canadian. I don't know what her, but anyhow, she's uh been an activist for, you know, 30 years plus. And her husband, ex-husband, who's a bit scandalous, founded the Cannabis Culture magazine. And so
good.
she's on, yeah, she's on Twitter. You should find her. I can
Send them.
direct her to
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
Yeah. But you know, because it was just easier to corrupt there, you know, that there, like, it just quickly went to all of the government and, you know, wealthy people who basically bought out the movement there much faster and consolidated much faster than even the United States. And that's just because of the way our governments are organized differently. But a lot of these companies had to go up into Canada to even become publicly traded. And I think a few American companies did reverse mergers with Canadian companies in the beginning. I don't remember which ones. So the intent has always been to consolidate power. I don't think anybody ever really intended to share the market. I think that that's why Mason Tvert was, you know, saying, oh, people would just be happy that they're not getting arrested. Dude, like, did you totally forget that
But
there's
they're
a
going to
whole
keep getting arrested,
economy?
though.
Yeah, but they totally forgot that poor people were selling drugs they're not evil people. They're poor and there's no other options. Otherwise, they wouldn't be poor. So when dealing drugs is the only thing that can get you to where you're not working three jobs, then, it becomes appealing, but then they want to blame the victim. It's this circular nonsense that they benefit from. My communities don't benefit from it, but they want to gaslight me like a bully, but I'm the one that's actually one of the experts in what impacts my community, but they want to discount my relationship to my own community and my own upbringing. I'm literally one step out of the hood. You want to question that? Like, seriously, it's ridiculous. And, I've watched all these elites just come in and use this regulation model that Brian Vicente with his sensible Colorado, sensible regulation. You see, again, they just control all of the dialogue around it so that they keep this cadence with this certain narrative that these regulations are good and that you need them and that you have to pay high taxes, because if we can't tell people how we're going to pay for this and how we're going to regulate ourselves, then these lawmakers aren't going to let us do this. And so therefore they create that incentive, people vote for it, and then there you go. Now you have this protection racket between
It,
them and the lawmakers.
it feels like in a lot of ways that this movement has sort of been co-opted by people that were against it to begin
Yes,
with.
absolutely. So John C. Hunter III, I think I might have mentioned him before. He was the United Cannabis Company, one of the founders of that. He was on their board. When I first started the Cannabis Consumers Coalition, um, I had a bunch of people just call them out because John C. Hunter and this guy, Ernest Blackmon, who were founders of the United Cannabis Corporation, which spun off of River Rock and Tony Vazura and other folks. Um, they have connections with law enforcement. And so a lot of people that came in and benefited as MSOs, yes, absolutely, they had links into law enforcement. And so that was it's just it is something. It was literally a compromise, if you will, with law enforcement, to go back to what we were talking about earlier, for to keep their gravy train going too. Like, it's a barter. We'll if we give you this, then we'll take this. So we're going to legalize marijuana, but we're still, um, as one person in Colorado named Chris Jetter always posts on, that someone else that you should also talk to that can talk about the history. But he has a hashtag tax not legal, and that's literally what happened. When I was an activist, I was trying to legalize my my friends who were growers, and my own consumption and that transaction. That's what I was trying to do. I wasn't trying to usher in the same model that created all of the protests during the Occupy movement. No, I'm actually against the corporate takeover of our government. And so watching it happen in cannabis has been nothing short of distressing. And I'm sure it has been for other activists and advocates, especially the legacy OG folks who are even older than me, because we did put in a lot of personal resources to advance cannabis. And it did get taken over. And we did carry this market on our shoulders when it was illicit in many different ways. And it did get taken over. And then they're trying to tell us that we're not good enough to be business people. But we were good enough to create $1 billion illicit market underneath everyone's noses. And then you're going to take it from us and you're going to make it too expensive, not only to participate in businesses, but to participate in policy. I have to go either register as a citizen's lobbyist. I do have a master's in public policy. I'm always an advocate. I paid to be an advocate a lot. You know what I mean? But otherwise I would have no access at all, because the United States has become so pay to play, especially after Citizens United. And so cannabis has become the same way. And so only the elite now, who benefited from the original regulatory capture of tax and regulate, are able to continue creating social policy, and which still continues to keep people like me out of the actual conversation by cost also, which is why social equity isn't just about money, it's about access. So the whole tax and regulate model as it is blocked off that access because it was a dollar sign was affixed to it. So you're
And I'll
making us
tell you,
pay high taxes, and you're also making us pay high licensing fees. So you know, the lack of access is everywhere. The inequity is everywhere.
yeah. And I'll tell you that I thought the social equity, from what I've learned about the few states I've studied, including Vermont, which I know very well, was just a total failure, in my
Yes,
opinion.
yes. Well, and I think with Vermont, you know, it's a different demographic, first of all.
But
And so, you know, equity, and that's the other conversation that needs to be had. That's a very uncomfortable conversation, but you know, in terms of the leading voices in social equity, it has to be community based. And drug policy has impacted multiple communities, and that includes poor whites too. And I feel like there's a rush, and you know, there's a rush to, like, yes, people, like, you cannot change the color of your skin. And yes, you are, you know, if you put you, for example, you, Caleb, and a black person are in two different vehicles, the black person's gonna more than likely get pulled over. But then the difference there's another layer. If that black person has more money than you and more access than you, that person might have a higher possibility of getting better legal support than you.
sure.
And therefore, you get terrible legal support through the city because you're a poor white guy. And, you know, so the disparity isn't always skin tone.
No. And I thought that you
But
mentioned that earlier. You said a lot of it is class based, which is a
yes,
sentiment that I personally agree with.
yes. But because they did such a faux pas in excluding the most obvious people who've been targeted in the drug war, which it is a racist war, they've disenfranchised the whole concept of what equity is, you know, and people are trying to change that definition now and overtake that power, that conversation. And you know, it's more than, it's the system that the United States has created that's now evolving into other things. Like, we have voters don't have access to the legal, to any legislative process. It doesn't have to even be cannabis. You know, this is, Princeton did a study about you know, about, you know, the rise of oligarchy in the United States. And voters, I think, have zero influence on policy. You have to be part of a organization or a corporation to have any impact at all on policy. And so it's extremely competitive. So, you know, it's just,
I have
yeah.
seen some studies like this, where, you know, really, I don't want to say your
Yeah,
vote
it's a
doesn't
class
matter, but
thing.
yeah.
Yeah. No, because then I don't want to get circular, but that just leads me back to everybody being crabs in the basket, fighting over, you know, relevancy and who should lead the dialogue. And then what happens? Nothing happens. That's why we don't have any social equity. We're the wrong people getting the social equity contracts, and then nothing happens.
You know, and I made a LinkedIn account, and I gotta say, there are a lot of like corporate guys talking about how they built this industry, and it kind of bothers me. It's like, you guys maybe built a dispensary, which is cool, and I appreciate that
Yeah.
you have money to do that. But like, the guys who built this industry were black market dealers, pretty much. Those
Well,
guys,
and then they try, yeah.
growers, you know what I'm saying? Like, the people that put their, you know, they took all the risk here, and now the
But that's
guys are
part of
coming.
the,
Go ahead.
yeah. Sorry, but yes, no, but that's part of the deliberate whitewashing of marijuana. Like, it started in Colorado, you know, it started when they started, you know, started in other states, but you know, I can speak for Colorado because that's where I live. But you know, it started with these wealthy lobbyists, you know, like that Rob Corey guy that went to Stanford. There's literally an article on 5280 from, like, I can send it to you, from 2011, that talks about how he's a corporate attorney, you know, Stanford educated, whatever. These people came in and brought all their friends in and slowly just changed what, you know, what that looks like. And then, yeah, you go on LinkedIn and you actually see that. In fact, that I worked in corporate America, and and I wasn't like traumatized in corporate America because it was predominantly white male. Back then, I didn't really understand disparity as much as I did now, right? But when I moved back to Colorado and in 2013, after leaving in 2008, and I started going to events, and maybe I would see one or two other people of color, but it was just like all corporate type people. It actually caused me a lot of distress because I didn't see a single familiar face. And I was like, wow, what happened to the original crew? Like, what happened to like the ragtag activists where we were pulling whatever we had together, staying up all night long, making signs. We were caregivers. We had the gray market. We had people who had dispensaries. Like the early on, all those people were gone. They had been completely shut out or sold out, and it caused me a lot of emotional distress because I know it'd take over when I see one. I mean, that's just, I mean, like, I was like, wait a minute, these aren't the people who I used to buy weed from. And some were. Like, here's the other side of it, though, because there were a lot of, people who, went to college, but they sold drugs and they were, like trust fund kids. And it was just something that they did. And then, they can just cut their dreadlocks and get a marijuana license and their wealthy parents can support them. That's a lot of the demographics of what took over Colorado.
Sure.
Like
Sure.
the wealthy bro culture. And
I
then,
see that. Yeah.
yeah. And then from there, it, evolved into the more corporate model. And, that was part of the tax and regulate, make it responsible, regulated, corporate, very proper people because you don't want to have anything else, God forbid anything else. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just, I don't want to say I'm against legalization. I support decriminalization. I think that, I think that creating just this box tax and regulate model where you have limited licensing and you have people that, even social equity, they're still controlling who can and who can't come
Well,
into the space.
In Vermont, we don't have limited licensing. You can have one of each license type. So that was, they call it de-verticalization, right? So they try to
Yeah.
break it up so that, although there's sort of ways around it where rich people can just kind of give their friends the money and buy the license. But,
Yeah.
that was the idea behind that was to, something kind of like you're talking, which was a nice thought,
I mean, it's a nice thought, but then like the thing is when you don't have a free market, then you have all these restrictions still. Because then now there might be someone who wants to grow bigger. And let's say they're just good business people and they're not like horrible MSOs that are just trying to buy out the industry. You're
Sure.
also restricting them from participating.
Mm.
This is why we moved to Oklahoma, because Oklahoma is a true free market and it's a total, at one point it was a total shit show, but it's leveling out now and it's getting more costly. And this is why it's a misnomer to say that I'm against regulations. I do support regulations. I work in compliance. I want clean weed. I want tested weed. I don't want price gouging, and I don't.
What's up with the testing down there, Larissa?
Oh, it's so unstable. You can't rely on any company, and the test can vary several percentage points between strains, between companies that you get it tested at. So, and then there's rumors of people buying out, testing companies just like everywhere else. So, we need many more regulations on testing too. Some people are trying to advocate more state involvement in testing. Some people, I think that consumers should have more access to testing. There should be more testing labs. Like there seems to be a monopoly on
You know how
testing
many
right out the
labs we
gate.
have in Vermont right now that can do full panel testing,
Huh. Are you kidding me? One.
and they're closed. So
So people aren't getting products sold then?
I had friends that had samples backed up for 3 weeks, and they closed for 3 weeks. They're going to be open, I think, January 3rd. That's the only lab in the state that can do full panel testing.
And this is what I go back again with the protectionist regulations. Look, you're stuck.
I
Like
don't
it's
I don't
almost
want to accuse them of nothing like that, but I just, dude, like I thought the state should have maybe subsidized a couple labs. They have a ton of
yes.
labs, like, and people in southern Vermont. now have to drive like 6 or 7 hours round trip to drop their samples off.
Yeah, no, that's
It
yeah,
sucks, dude.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We took our products to a testing lab that's also works with the state. And but I kind of questioned our results. Like I know some of our percentage points were down low, like our Flow Widow, for example, which I smoked and it was like the first time I was high in a long time, but it's a sativa based strain and it literally was very sativa. But anyhow,
Okay.
so your own product and you're just like, and then here in Oklahoma, a lot of people shop for high THC percentage,
Sure.
which is so frustrating.
Sure.
So but the thing is that there's still room to grow and it's still more of an open market and there can be gluts in product, but a lot of times it's mid-grade or lower. It's still pretty competitive for high grade cannabis here. And but I look at other markets that are much more restricted and all I see is just market protectionism and this,
How's the
closed
water
loop
quality
regulatory
down
model.
there? How's the
Huh?
water? How's the water quality?
Well, it depends on where you live and what your water is. If it's city water, I wouldn't recommend it, but we have well water. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, it's and then there's a lot of fracking.
I know.
So where
I
we
know.
are, there's not.
That's why I asked you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there's definitely areas, where I wouldn't, you know, live.
Yeah.
I don't, where there's a lot of heavy drilling going on. Yeah. And a lot of that, you see a lot of that as you head more west in Oklahoma. We're in eastern Oklahoma, so where we're at, it's
Okay.
more farmland. And
Yeah.
actually, I don't even know if I've seen an oil rig anywhere nearby.
Go.
Definitely not. Yeah, that's more out west. There, and even in Colorado, there's a lot of natural gas. And
Right.
so, yeah, it's that Oklahoma has its challenges, that's for sure. But in terms of achieving equity and access, which is a part of equity, I would say a model like Oklahoma would be better than like,
Cool.
a very restricted model.
Go. I got to get on the phone with you. I need
Okay.
all the details. Look,
All right.
I'm gonna get out here. I'm out of questions. I always leave the
Okay.
last word for the guest. Larissa, thank you again for your time here. This has been fascinating. If you got anything else or any shameless plugs you want to throw in, now's your time. Happy holidays. Thanks for being here with me.
Thank you. Happy holidays. Happy New Year. Once
Thanks.
again, check out iComply for your compliance needs, especially heading into the new year. That's actually the best time to rework all of your SOPs, so update them, law changes come in, all those regulations take effect. So yeah,
Word
that's
up.
my shameless plug.
Finish
I
your
should
book.
probably should have drank caffeine before I called because I'm fading out.
Finish your book.
Oh, well, I'll get there one of these days.
All right.
All
Take care,
right.
Larissa. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Likewise, Caleb. Talk to you soon.
Peace.